Harold Lasky would come over. You get to know him, I had a good time. But the shocking thing, now this is September 1, 1949. At that point, having finished first in my class at the Harvard Law School, having been a law clerk on the Third Circuit, I couldn't get a job in Philadelphia or any place else. So finally...
You could wait. When you say you couldn't get a job...
I couldn't get... by this time your expectancy was, I made it. The tradition is these big law firms grab you up and start you as an associate. If you're good, 7 years, 8 years, you become a partner. But, all the Philadelphia firms said no, 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 no. So it happened that the one job offer I'd gotten was, even before I started clerking for Judge Goodrich, was with Paul Wife, Whiskey Wharton and Garrison in New York. And so I called them about 5 days before leaving a payroll. There's a great common law principle that there should never be a lap or a gap in the season. So you never want to be without getting a job someplace or getting a check every month. So I called them up, and that's when they said come over, and I joined. But for 3 years I commuted every day from Philadelphia to New York by train to do it.
How did it make you feel when you realized that, despite having, quote unquote, made you weren't gonna...
Well, you just know that life would change and things would get better. I had a good wife, good mother, good father. You just knew that life would be better.
It didn't make you angry or...
Well, I'm pretty sure that time when I got indignant, I knew that, in Philadelphia that there were people that had gone to college with me, gone to law school with me, who had good jobs, who had not done as well as I had. And I just thought that something was wrong then, but I enjoyed the work in New York, and I guess I'd only been there about a year when Thurgood Marshall called me, asked me would I begin to help them in the segregation cases, which I did, part-time for free.
Tell me about, we were talking about one day Thurgood Marshall called you up and asked for your help. Tell me about that.
Well, I was in New York at Paul Weiss working every day, and I got a call from Mr. Marshall saying that this was at the end of June 50 or 51, that he was going to have some lawyers in from all over the country to discuss whether it was possible, was it time to attack segregation in public school, and would I come to a meeting? And I said yes. I went to the meeting, and some great people were there, like Bob Carter, Connie Motley, Jack Greenberg, Bill Hasty was in the group, and Bob Ming, and we began to discuss it. And after about 2 or 3 meetings, we decided this was the time to begin the attack, and a strategy that actually Houston and Hasty and Marshall had started long before I finished law school. We put in effect, and come May 17, 1954, it ended in victory.
Did you have any misgivings up to that point in terms of the likelihood of victory, or were you pretty assured?
Sure. Well, the problem was there were 5 cases in the Supreme Court, each of which had held that segregated schools were not unconstitutional. And you were dealing with all of the cases, I guess even including Delaware and Kansas, where the judges that would hear the cases had a vested interest in the existing system, and that they would recognize, particularly in South Carolina, that if you made the change, what it perhaps would do, and you didn't know what position the federal government would take. Nobody could say that the federal employment system was desegregated at that time, and most major corporations, certainly not. And it was a real push, and so we did it. And I think, have you ever read Simple Justice?
Yes.
Well, you know that story.
Did tell me about Thurgood Marshall. Tell me about what it was like to work with him.
Oh, he was tremendous. He was awfully bright, very able. I think one of the unimportant things said in history so far, that people think of him as a civil rights lawyer. But he was a superb all-around lawyer. I mean, he could, corporate matters, things having nothing to do with race, he was as good as anybody. At the end, we had collected, I would say, the outstanding scholars in the United States. Paul Ford, Jack Greenberg, Lou Pollock, Weinstein, Charlie Black, Thurgood Marshall, Bill Hasty. And I could sit in that room at night and watch these brilliant minds go back and forth. Despite all that brilliance, Marshall never lost control of that room. And in the end, he was the one that ultimately made the decision. I don't think young kids know that, and I always think that's one of the great tragedies about the Howard Law School today, because with Marshall, Howard, Spotswood Robinson, Howard, and several others, and they were, Jimmy Neighbor, they were superb people, and I think we've lost that somehow, and people, say, now most kids will say, anybody could have won that case, which isn't true.
Do they really say
that?
that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I take the average student today with, gee, if I had that case, I would have won it just like that, which that was not true.
That seems supreme overconfidence to me. I mean,
but life has changed now. But it's tough. I mean, you if you go back and read, it's almost impossible to find that there's legislative history where somebody said, when we said equal protection, that meant to end segregation. Now, you can make good arguments as to why it did, but you just couldn't look at the Constitution. You couldn't look at it, and you had 5 decisions who read it and said, "Oh no, that's not so." And it's usually if you're down 5-0, because unless you're Jackie Robinson, it's kind of hard to win the ball game. And so it was really a difficult thing. And I really think that every human being, particularly even more every black human being, should read Simple Justice, because it really tells the story better than I've ever seen before.
Did you have a sense once the verdict came in, did you have a sense of how enormous this decision really was going to be in terms of this country and its history? Well,
I knew because when I was law clerk to Justice Frankfurter, in 1949, we had an earlier South Carolina case up there. And Elliot Richardson and I spent a week trying to convince the justice that they should take the case and hear it then, which they didn't do because Governor Burns, who had been on the Supreme Court, was governor of South Carolina, and he went to the state legislature and raised a lot of money by taxing soda water pop. And so he filed a petition saying, let the cases come back to South Carolina, and I will spend so much money that I'll make them equal. And so the court sent it back for that reason. I had done some work on that, and I spent about 4 or 5 days with Elliot trying to convince the justice why I should take it. In fact, he asked me to write an opinion which would outlaw segregation, but would not overrule Plessy versus Ferguson. And so I'd worked my way through these problems. But I knew Justice Black, who was certainly a so-called liberal senator, congressman, judge. But I remember, just Frankfurter coming back saying, Black said, "Oh, gee, that's something you just can't do. That will just completely destroy peace in the South and everything else. And it was a difficult